My name is Jessica, and I am 36 years old. I work as a financial consultant in a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job that is steady, analytical, and rarely dramatic. I never thought of myself as someone who sought out conflict. In fact, I built my entire life on structure, planning, and quiet preparation. I wasn't wealthy in the beginning. I came from a middle-class family, raised by parents who believed in saving for rainy days, but also in helping out relatives when they needed it. As the oldest of three siblings, I was always the responsible one. Emily, my younger sister, was artistic and spontaneous, and Daniel, our youngest brother, lived for risk and excitement. My parents, David and Linda, leaned heavily on me to set an example. For years, I did. I graduated top of my class in economics, worked my way up in the financial sector, and quietly made choices that built me a fortune. Though no one in my family knew the extent of it, I hid intentionally. Part of me was proud of what I'd built, but another part was terrified of what would happen if my family discovered it. I had seen enough in my profession, clients whose siblings, cousins, or even parents drained them dry when they found out about hidden accounts or windfalls. I learned early that money, when visible, attracts not only gratitude but resentment, jealousy, and entitlement. So I told my family very little. They knew I was comfortable, that I had a decent salary, but they never knew about the trust funds, the diversified investments, or the properties I had quietly acquired under LLCs. By 36, I had more than $2 million in various forms of liquid and illiquid assets. To the outside world, I lived simply. A modest condo, a car that was 5 years old, no luxury designer bags, no flashy vacations. It was deliberate camouflage, and it worked for years. But hiding wealth doesn't shield you from life. 3 years ago, my world shifted when my father was diagnosed with a degenerative heart condition. The medical costs piled up quickly, and while my parents had some insurance, it wasn't nearly enough. I helped silently, transferring money through loans or gifts I pretended came from my yearly bonuses. My siblings, however, weren't nearly as helpful. Emily was struggling with her art gallery, which barely made enough to keep its doors open, and Daniel, after his third failed business venture, had sunk into gambling debts. Still, they had no problem demanding money from my parents, or expecting me to cover emergencies. I did, quietly, discreetly, while downplaying what I was capable of. It wasn't until last year that my situation turned. My company was hit by an internal scandal that dragged several of us into legal scrutiny, even though I had no involvement. For months, my accounts were under investigation, and while eventually I was cleared, my access to much of my money was frozen temporarily. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. Imagine knowing you are wealthy on paper but unable to touch a cent of it when you need it most. During that time, my father's condition worsened, and hospital bills reached desperate levels. For the first time in years, I couldn't quietly solve everything myself. I needed help. And so, reluctantly, I turned to the one place I thought I could: my family. I remember sitting in my parents' kitchen, the faint smell of my mother's coffee lingering as I explained my situation. I didn't tell them about my hidden fortune or the frozen accounts. I simply told them I needed temporary support, just for a few months. My mother's face tightened instantly. My father avoided eye contact, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his medication on the table. Emily raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms, looking at me like I had committed some unspeakable betrayal. Daniel laughed under his breath, shaking his head, muttering, "Of all people, you're the one asking us for money?" The room filled with silence that weighed heavier than words. My mother finally said, "Jessica, you've always been the one we never worried about. We don't have extra to give you. Why don't you ask the bank for a loan? Isn't that what you always tell people in your work?" The sting of her dismissal was sharper than I expected. My father, in his fragile state, whispered, "We can't carry you, Jess. We barely carry ourselves." Emily snapped, "If you've been living so modestly all these years, then where did all your money go? Don't tell me you weren't saving." And Daniel, with that cruel smirk, added, "Maybe you weren't as smart as we thought." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the millions, about the sacrifices, about the nights I stayed up analyzing markets while they slept or partied. I wanted to shout that I had carried them for years without ever asking for thanks. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, silent, watching as my family, the very people I had shielded and supported, turned me away without hesitation. I left their house with tears burning in my eyes, realizing that all the money in the world couldn't buy the one thing I wanted in that moment: genuine family support when I was vulnerable. That was the beginning. The day I asked for help and was rejected was the day everything changed between me and them. It was the day I began to see my family not as the loving safety net I once believed, but as people whose perception of me was built on convenience. And as I walked out into the cold night air, clutching my purse with nothing but a few $100s inside, I felt a loneliness that no fortune could cure. After that night in my parents' kitchen, something inside me cracked. I had always been the dependable one, the strong one, the one they called when bills had to be covered or crises needed fixing. But the moment I needed them, just once, just for a short while, they shut the door in my face. For days, I couldn't stop replaying their words. My mother's sharp dismissal, my father's weak avoidance, Emily's judgment, and Daniel's mocking laughter, they blended together like poison in my veins. I went to work the next morning, sitting in my office surrounded by ledgers, financial statements, and stock reports, but my mind wasn't on numbers anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt untethered. I didn't tell my colleagues about what happened at home, of course. In finance, weakness spreads like fire. The moment someone suspects you're vulnerable, you're marked. I kept up appearances, tailored blazer, steady voice, the same calm explanations for clients who trusted me to manage their wealth. Ironically, many of them came to me panicked, begging me to protect their millions from market shifts or tax hikes. I gave them advice while secretly envying the fact that they could lean on me when I had no one to lean on myself. At night, when I came home to my modest condo, I would sit on the edge of my bed staring at my laptop, refreshing the frozen balances in my accounts, watching as the digits mocked me. They were there, millions, but inaccessible. Like being stranded in a desert with a bottle of water locked behind glass. A week later, Emily called me, not to ask how I was, but to lecture me. "Jessica," she said in that condescending tone she always used, "maybe this is a lesson. You always pretended to have everything figured out, but look where that got you. Maybe it's time you humbled yourself a little." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream that I had been the one quietly paying her overdue rent when her gallery couldn't break even, that I had covered her debts with suppliers while she flaunted her bohemian lifestyle. But she didn't know, and she never would. I had hidden my fortune so well that even the ways I helped them were invisible. Not long after, Daniel appeared at my door. He reeked of alcohol, his hair messy, eyes bloodshot. "So it's true," he muttered, leaning against my doorway. "You're broke." He laughed, slapping the frame like it was some kind of joke. Guess the genius finally ran out of magic tricks. My patience snapped. I told him to leave, but he shoved his way inside, collapsing on my couch. "You know," he continued, "I always thought you looked down on me. My businesses failed, my bets didn't work out, but at least I never pretended to be perfect. You built this image, and now it's falling apart." He had no idea what he was talking about. The irony of his words was almost unbearable. I ordered him out, threatened to call the police, and when he finally staggered into the night, I locked the door behind him and sat shaking. My own brother had come not with support, but with ridicule. Meanwhile, my father's health declined further. I wanted desperately to help with his hospital bills, but every attempt to access my accounts hit the same legal roadblocks. The investigation into my company had dragged longer than expected, and though I was innocent, bureaucracy doesn't move with compassion. My mother sent a message in the family group chat saying, "If anyone can spare some money for your father's medication, it would mean a lot." My hands hovered over the keyboard, wanting to scream, "I would if I could. Haven't I always been the one?" But I deleted my words and stayed silent. Neither Emily nor Daniel replied in the chat. The tension between us grew unbearable. When I visited the hospital, my mother avoided conversation with me, treating me like I was somehow less than before. Emily barely acknowledged me, acting as if I were invisible. Daniel didn't even bother showing up most days. And me, I sat beside my father, holding his frail hand, forcing a smile while hiding the storm inside me. I felt like a stranger in my own family. The people I had sacrificed for, lied to protect, and shielded from the ugliness of money had turned cold, as if my worth to them had disappeared the moment they believed I couldn't give anymore. It was in those weeks that I began to question everything. Why had I hidden my fortune so carefully? Why had I chosen silence over honesty? I thought it was protection for them and for me. But sitting in that sterile hospital room, watching the people I loved look at me with suspicion instead of trust, I realized that my secrecy had built walls, not bridges. And now, when I needed help the most, those walls had trapped me alone. That was when I made a decision. If my family was going to treat me like a burden, then I would stop protecting them from the truth. I didn't know when or how, but one day soon, they would learn exactly what I had been hiding all these years. And when that day came, I knew it would either shatter us completely or force them to see me in a way they never had before. The decision to eventually reveal my fortune simmered quietly inside me, but before I could act on it, things at home grew worse. My father's health spiraled rapidly, and by late spring he was admitted to the hospital for longer stays. I made it a point to visit him every evening after work, even when exhaustion from the office weighed heavily on me. I would arrive still dressed in my blazer and heels, sit beside his bed, and tell him stories about the city, about the clients I met, about the absurd arguments in the office. He would smile faintly, his skin pale and thin, his hand trembling as he patted mine. Those small moments mattered to me more than anything else. But what cut me deeper was the way my mother looked at me during those visits, like I had failed them, like I was no longer the strong daughter she could lean on. Emily, meanwhile, seized the chance to play the martyr. She began telling relatives that she was carrying the family burden, that she was sacrificing her time for Dad. She conveniently omitted the fact that she barely paid for his medication and that most of her visits consisted of posting filtered photos of herself holding his hand on social media, fishing for sympathy from friends. "Taking care of Dad is exhausting, but love makes us strong," she wrote once, attaching a staged picture. I almost dropped my phone when I saw it. She was painting herself as the savior, while I sat silently, the true one keeping everything afloat in ways no one saw. Daniel remained Daniel, reckless and selfish. Rumors reached me that he had borrowed more money from shady lenders, and one afternoon, as I was leaving the hospital, two men in dark jackets approached me. One of them asked, "Are you Daniel's sister?" When I nodded cautiously, he leaned in and whispered, "Tell him he's running out of time. Debt collectors don't like to wait." My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to disown him right there, but blood ties are strange. They keep you tethered even when you wish they wouldn't. At work, whispers spread about me too. The legal freeze on my accounts had somehow leaked into office gossip. One colleague, Patrick, joked in the break room, "Careful, Jessica might ask us for lunch money." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but my cheeks burned. I realized then that vulnerability wasn't just a family weakness, it was a social weakness. People smell it, exploit it, and mock it. That night, when I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat staring at the blank wall, wondering if all my years of careful planning had been for nothing. A week later, the breaking point came. My father needed a new procedure, and the hospital called saying they required a deposit up front. My mother called me in tears, her voice cracking as she said, "Jessica, we don't have it. We need $12,000 by Friday. If you can't help, I don't know what we'll do." I wanted to collapse. 12,000 might have been pocket change in my real accounts, but with my funds still inaccessible, it might as well have been $1 million. I swallowed hard and said quietly, "I'll find a way, Mom." I spent the next 2 days scrambling, selling jewelry, cashing out smaller personal savings accounts, even withdrawing from a retirement fund I swore I'd never touch. I managed to scrape together enough, but not without breaking down inside. When I brought the money to the hospital and paid the bill, my mother hugged me, relief washing over her face. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe she saw me again as the dependable daughter. But then Emily arrived, tossing her hair and saying loudly, "I called a friend and raised some money too. At least we're all contributing." She hadn't given a cent. I bit my tongue, swallowing the bitter truth. The resentment in me was growing like a wildfire. Each interaction with my siblings left scars. Emily continued spreading lies that I was financially irresponsible. Daniel cornered me again, asking if I could spot him just 5,000 until he sorted out a new investment opportunity. I laughed in his face for the first time in my life, something that shocked even me. "Do you think I'm stupid, Daniel?" I snapped. "You don't want to invest, you want to gamble it away." His eyes hardened, and he spat back. "You're pathetic. You act superior, but the moment you stumble, you're nothing." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I sat there shaking, half in rage, half in despair. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since college. I poured every word of betrayal, every ounce of anger, every confession about the millions I had hidden. I wrote about the nights I stayed awake analyzing markets, the clients I carefully studied, the risks I took, the properties I acquired, all the things I never told my family. And I wrote about how the very fortune I thought would protect me had become a prison. The secrecy had turned me into a villain in their eyes, a failure, when in truth I was the only one who had been strong. I closed the journal with tears on my cheeks, whispering to myself, "One day, they will know." And for the first time, I began to believe that maybe revealing the truth wasn't just about me. It was about finally forcing them to see who I really was and what I had carried for them all these years. The weight of silence was becoming unbearable. Every visit to my parents' house felt like walking into a courtroom where I was the defendant and my siblings were the jury. My mother rarely spoke to me without some undertone of disappointment. Emily always found a way to slip in a remark about my poor planning, and Daniel didn't even bother hiding his contempt anymore. It felt like I was living in two separate realities. By day, I was Jessica, the financial consultant, respected and trusted by clients. By night, I was Jessica, the failed daughter, judged and diminished by the very people I had spent my life supporting. The breaking point came during a Sunday family dinner at my parents' house. My father had insisted we all gather, trying to keep some sense of normalcy, even though he was frail and could barely sit upright at the table. The air was tense from the moment I walked in. Emily was already there, serving food like she owned the place, speaking in her sweet, performative tone. Daniel arrived late, as always, swaggering in with that careless grin. I took my seat quietly, trying to focus on Dad's tired smile rather than the storm I knew was brewing. Halfway through the meal, Emily looked at me and said, "So, Jessica, have you figured out how to manage your money yet? Or are you still drowning?" Her words sliced through the air. I put down my fork and stared at her, my pulse pounding. My mother didn't scold her, didn't even flinch. My father's eyes darted between us nervously. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "She's probably still broke. You know Jess, always pretending she's better than us, but when it comes down to it, she's no different."
I felt something inside me snap.
For years, I had bitten my tongue, let them think whatever they wanted, hidden everything for their sake. But that night, in front of everyone, I couldn't hold it anymore. My voice came out low but steady. "You think I've failed? You think I'm broke?" I leaned forward, looking directly at Emily, then Daniel. "The truth is, I have more money than both of you will ever see in your lifetimes. I've been helping this family in ways you can't even imagine. Those hospital bills you thought came from nowhere? That rent Emily magically covered? The debts Daniel's collectors didn't break your legs over? That was me. Me, silently fixing everything while you two played the victims." The room went still. Emily froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel blinked, then scoffed. "You're lying," he said. "If you had money, why would you come begging us for help?" I clenched my jaw. Because my accounts were frozen temporarily. I couldn't access them. But don't mistake that for failure. I've built a fortune over years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of choices you'll never understand. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Jessica, what are you talking about? Her voice trembled, half confusion, half accusation. I turned to her, my chest tight. I'm talking about the fact that I've been the one holding this family together financially for years, and you never knew because I didn't want to see you turn into this. Resentful, entitled, blind to who I really am. My father coughed weakly, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. Jess, why didn't you tell us? His voice was so soft, it almost broke me. But Emily's face twisted in fury. So you've been hiding millions while we struggled? While I nearly lost my gallery. While Daniel. She cut herself off, glancing at him, then back at me. You're unbelievable. You think this makes you noble? It makes you a liar. Daniel jumped in, his voice rising. No wonder you're alone. You think money makes you better than us. You've been sitting on a pile of gold while we've been scraping by. Their words slammed into me like blows. I wanted to scream that I had saved them countless times, that their lives would be far worse without me. Instead, I whispered, I hid it because I knew this is how you'd react. And look, I was right. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. My father tried to call after me, but his voice was weak. My mother sat frozen, her expression unreadable. Emily and Daniel glared at me as if I were a stranger. I left the house shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, tears streaming down my face before I even reached my car. For years, I had dreamed of the day my family might see me for who I really was, maybe even respect me. But the moment I revealed the truth, it twisted everything. Instead of gratitude, I saw anger. Instead of relief, I saw betrayal. They didn't care about the years I sacrificed. They cared only that I had kept the secret from them. That night, alone in my apartment, I realized something devastating. Money had not only failed to protect me, it had poisoned every relationship that mattered most. And now that the secret was out, I had no idea if my family would ever look at me the same way again. The days after that explosive dinner felt like walking through an endless storm. I had expected anger, maybe even shock, but not the level of hostility that followed. My phone buzzed constantly. Emily leaving long, scathing voice messages about how selfish I had been, accusing me of letting her suffer just to stroke my own ego. You could have saved my gallery, Jessica, she hissed in one of them. Instead, you watched me beg strangers for loans while you sat on millions. You're cruel. You're not my sister anymore. Daniel was no better. He showed up outside my building one night, pounding on my door until the neighbors threatened to call the police. When I finally cracked it open with the chain still locked, his face was twisted with rage. You owe me, he spat. You let me drown in debt while you hoarded money. If you don't give me something now, I swear I'll tell everyone in the city what kind of fraud you are. His words sent a chill down my spine. I slammed the door shut and slid down against it, shaking. I thought maybe my parents would try to calm things down, but instead, my mother called me with a voice I barely recognized. Cold, clipped, and unfamiliar. Jessica, what you did was unforgivable. Your father is heartbroken. He keeps asking why you never trusted us enough to tell us. I don't know what to say to him anymore. I tried to explain, tried to tell her that I had only wanted to protect them, that I feared money would corrupt everything, but she cut me off. No more excuses. You betrayed us. And then she hung up. I stared at the phone, my chest aching like someone had taken a hammer to AT work. The pressure mounted as well. Somehow, whispers about my hidden wealth and frozen accounts reached my colleagues. I caught Patrick smirking in the hallway, muttering to another coworker, "Guess she's not as perfect as she pretends." My boss, Mr. Caldwell, called me into his office one afternoon. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his eyes sharp. Jessica, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but when clients start asking questions about your financial stability, it affects this firm. You need to get things under control or step aside. The humiliation burned. Me, the woman who had guided clients for over a decade, being told I was now the liability. But the worst moment came when I went to visit my father in the hospital. I walked into his room with a small bag of fresh fruit, hoping to bring some comfort, only to find Emily already there, perched on the chair by his bed like some guardian angel. She looked up and sneered. Oh, look, the millionaire has arrived. My father turned his head toward me, his eyes filled not with the warmth I once knew, but with confusion and sorrow. Jess, why didn't you tell me? He whispered. All those nights I worried about the bills. All those times your mother cried herself to sleep. You had the power to end it. Why would you hide it from us? His voice broke, and so did I. I dropped the bag of fruit on the counter, tears welling up. Dad, I thought I was protecting you. I thought if no one knew, then no one would grow bitter or greedy. I didn't want to lose you to resentment. But Emily cut in sharply. Too late for that. You've already lost us. I spun toward her, fury igniting in me. Do you even hear yourself? All those years you let me clean up your messes, and now you want to play the saint? You're a hypocrite, Emily. She stood up, her face red. And you're a liar, Jessica. You're not generous, you're manipulative. You wanted control, and now that you can't hide anymore, you're trying to twist the story. My father weakly tried to raise his hand between us, but his strength was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the room, my heart breaking with every step. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I realized the truth. Revealing my fortune hadn't just caused conflict, it had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family. The trust we once had was gone, replaced with suspicion, anger, and blame. My siblings saw me as their enemy. My mother saw me as a betrayer, and my father, my sweet, gentle father, looked at me with disappointment I couldn't bear. And yet, even through the pain, a part of me hardened. If they wanted to see me as a villain, then perhaps it was time I stopped playing the savior. I had spent years giving without recognition, sacrificing without acknowledgement. Maybe it was time they felt the weight of their own choices. For the first time in my life, I wondered if walking away from them completely was the only way I could finally be free. Walking away from my family should have brought me peace, but instead it felt like carrying a stone in my chest wherever I went. I stopped answering Emily's calls, blocked Daniel's number after one too many drunken threats, and limited my visits to the hospital because every time I entered that room, my mother's cold eyes pierced me like knives. I focused on work, burying myself in numbers and client meetings, but even there, the weight followed me. It was as if a shadow had formed over every part of my life, whispering that no matter how much I had built, I was now defined by betrayal. Still, I began to act on the resolve I had made that night after the hospital fight. I contacted lawyers, unfroze my accounts once the investigation was finally cleared, and consolidated everything I owned. Properties, stocks, trust funds, it was all reorganized into a structure that no one in my family could touch, not even through manipulation or guilt. For years, I had kept everything fragmented, thinking it safer. But now I wanted control. If I was going to be the villain in their story, I would at least be a villain who held the reins. But the more distance I created, the more desperate my siblings became. Emily showed up at my office one afternoon, dressed in her carefully curated bohemian chic style, looking fragile and artistic for show. She didn't even greet me before snapping. You're really going to let Dad suffer while you sit on millions? Do you know how disgusting that is? I stood up slowly, forcing myself to remain calm. I already paid for Dad's last procedure. I've given more than anyone else in this family combined. Don't you dare accuse me of neglect. Her eyes narrowed, voice rising. Then give me control of his care fund. If you're so generous, let me manage it. I laughed bitterly. You mean let you spend it on your gallery debt? Not a chance. She flushed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, shouting loud enough for the whole office to hear. You're nothing but a greedy liar, Jessica. I watched colleagues peek over their cubicles, their whispers buzzing like bees in my ears. Daniel wasn't any better. One night, he ambushed me in the parking lot outside my condo, his face pale, his eyes frantic. Jess, I need $20,000.
Please.
They're going to kill me if I don't pay. His voice cracked, and for a split second, I saw the scared boy he once was. But then I remembered all the times he had lied, all the money that vanished into casinos and bars. My stomach hardened. No, Daniel. I can't keep saving you. He grabbed my arm, desperation twisting into anger. You owe me. You let me drown while you hid everything. You can't just walk away now. I pulled free, my voice trembling but firm. I don't owe you anything. Not anymore. He cursed at me, his words echoing in the empty lot, before disappearing into the night. I stood there, shaken, realizing how far gone he really was. Through it all, my father remained my only anchor. Though his voice was weak, he called me once, late at night, whispering, "Jess, I don't care about the money. I just wanted honesty. I wanted to know you trusted me." His words pierced deeper than any accusation. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered back, "I'm sorry, Dad. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was protecting myself." Silence hung heavy, and then he said, "I don't know how much time I have left, but I need you to remember this. Money doesn't measure love, and secrets always rot the bonds they were meant to protect." His voice faded as he hung up, and I sat clutching the phone, sobbing until I fell asleep. And the following weeks, I withdrew further. I stopped attending family dinners altogether, stopped responding to accusations, stopped explaining myself. Instead, I focused on solidifying my independence. I sold one of my properties and invested in a new venture overseas, something no one in my family could interfere with. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of freedom, a bitter one, but freedom nonetheless. Yet that freedom came with a price. Loneliness, so sharp it carved into me like glass. My condo felt emptier than ever, my evenings longer, my meals silent. I had money, yes, more than I could ever need, but the people I wanted to share it with were now strangers who saw me only through the lens of betrayal. And deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. Emily and Daniel weren't the type to let go. Their anger wasn't fading, it was growing, festering. And sooner or later, it would erupt again in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The final fracture came on a gray autumn afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang heavy and the air itself feels weighted with sorrow. My father passed quietly in his hospital bed, his hand resting in mine as his breathing slowed and then stopped. I sat frozen, unable to accept the silence that followed, unable to process that the one person who still held a thread of trust in me was gone. My mother cried loudly beside me, and Emily clung to her, performing grief with the same theatrical flair she had always carried. Daniel arrived hours later, smelling of liquor, muttering something about traffic, his eyes darting around the room as if he were already calculating what would come next. The days after his death were a blur of arrangements, condolences, and suffocating family tension. My mother barely spoke to me except to give short, cold instructions. Emily tried to seize control of the funeral planning, talking over me at every turn, while Daniel disappeared for hours only to resurface with more demands for money. At the reading of my father's will, the lawyer revealed that everything, what little remained, was to be split evenly among the three of us. I wasn't surprised. Dad had always tried to be fair. But Emily gasped dramatically, whispering to Daniel loud enough for me to hear, "Even after everything, she still gets a share? It's disgusting." My heart clenched. They weren't mourning our father. They were competing over scraps, even as I stood there drowning in grief. After the funeral, my mother asked me to leave her house. Her words were clipped, sharp. "Jessica, I need space. Your secrets destroyed this family. I can't look at you without remembering what you hid from us." I wanted to scream that it wasn't the money that destroyed us. It was their entitlement, their blindness, their refusal to see me beyond what I could provide. But I didn't argue. I simply nodded, packed my things, and left. For the first time in my life, I felt like an orphan, even though my mother was still alive. Weeks passed, and I expected maybe, just maybe, that grief would soften my siblings. Instead, Emily posted online about how some people value money over love, clearly aimed at me, while Daniel left me threatening messages demanding his share of the fortune I had hidden. My silence enraged them more, but I had no words left. I poured my energy into work, into new investments, into building a life that no longer revolved around trying to win their approval. Yet the emptiness gnawed at me. Nights were the worst, sitting alone in my condo, surrounded by walls I could afford but devoid of voices that should have filled them. IT was then I realized the cruel irony. I had hidden my wealth to protect my family from the poison of money, and in the end, it was the secrecy itself that destroyed us. My fortune hadn't saved me, it had isolated me. My siblings saw me as the enemy. My mother saw me as a liar, and the only person who understood me, my father, was gone. Still, even in the ashes, a part of me hardened into something stronger. I refused to let their bitterness define me. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to crumble under their judgment. I began volunteering anonymously at a local charity, funding scholarships for young women in finance, giving quietly to causes that mattered. I poured my wealth into helping strangers, people who didn't know my name, who couldn't resent me for having more than they did. And in those moments, I found fragments of peace. Now, as I sit here sharing my story with you, I wonder if you see the lesson I had to learn the hardest way possible. Money is power, yes, but it is also a mirror. It reveals who people truly are. When I had nothing, my family turned me away. When they discovered I had everything, they hated me for hiding it. The truth is, wealth cannot buy love, nor can it shield you from betrayal. It only magnifies what already exists in people's hearts. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Guard your heart as carefully as you guard your fortune, because once trust is broken, no amount of money in the world can repair it. I lost my family not because I was poor or because I was rich, but because I thought secrets could protect love. They don't. They only rot it from the inside out. And to those of you who have listened all the way until the end, thank you. Sharing this isn't easy, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe you're hiding something from your family, or maybe you're the one judging someone you don't fully understand. Please pause and think. Don't let resentment replace love. And if you found something in my words that touched you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed to my channel and left a like. Your support means more to me than you can imagine, and it reminds me that even in the darkest chapters, there are people willing to listen.